The legend of Atlantis has passed from generation to generation for hundreds of years, capturing our imagination with its claim of an advanced civilization that disappeared under the sea. The search for remnants of the lost empire has taken researchers around the globe. They claim to have evidence showing Atlantis submerged off the coast of Bermuda, in the Mediterranean Sea, near the Canary Islands, and as far away as Antarctica. Others think the fate of the island nation was linked to the devastating volcanic eruption in 1500 BC at Thera in the Greek islands, where the jagged peaks of Santorini rise above the Mediterranean Sea today. Now there is another theory, that the remnants of Atlantis are not submerged at all, but lie in plain sight on the American continent in what is now Florida. Let's take a closer look at Plato's description of the land to see why this piece of Florida real estate is worth exploring as the origin of Atlantis.
When you hear the word Atlantis, what does it mean to you? To some people, it's just a name. To others, it brings to mind Plato's story of a lost civilization. Looking toward the Gulf of Mexico, there was a plain which was said to be the fairest of all plains and very fertile. Near the center of the plain, at a distance of some 5.5 miles inland, there was a peninsula. Also, in the center of the peninsula, there was a hill. One of the primeval men of that country lived on this hill. His name was Evanor, and his wife was called Leucippe, and they had an only daughter who was called Cleito. The maiden had already reached womanhood by the time her mother and father died. Poseidon fell in love with her and enclosed the hill on which she lived. They made alternate zones of sea and land, larger and smaller, encircling their home. There were 2 zones of land and 3 zones of water placed evenly around the castle. Each zone was centered on the castle so that no outsider could get to the island home. He brought up 2 springs of water from beneath the earth, one of warm water and the other cold. Poseidon and his wife had 5 pairs of twin male children. Later, as the boys grew older, Poseidon divided the boundless continent into 10 portions. He gave the firstborn of the eldest twins the area of his mother's dwelling and the surrounding allotment. Then he made him king over the rest. The others he made princes and gave them rule over many men and a large territory. The eldest child, who was the first king, was named Atlas, and after him the kingdom was called Atlantis. Atlas and his descendants arranged the whole area in the following manner. First of all, they bridged over the zones of water which surrounded the ancient palace. Next, they cut canals around the hill that held the castle. Beginning from the sea, they cut a canal 300 feet wide and 100 feet deep. It was the outermost zone, which they carried through the peninsula, making a passage from the sea up through the city. This canal was 5.5 miles long and became a harbor with an opening sufficient for the largest vessels to enter and exit. This passage from the sea was 1,800 feet wide. However, the next 2 water zones were narrower. One was 1,200 feet wide, and the one that surrounded the central island to the north was 600 feet wide. The island on which the palace was situated had a diameter of ½ mile. All of this, including the zones and the bridges, which were 100 feet wide, were surrounded on every side by a stone wall. The wall was kept a distance of 5.5 miles from the largest zone or harbor and enclosed the whole city. The ends extended to the mouth of the bay, and they placed towers and gates on the bridges where the sea passed in. Other palaces in the interior of the citadel were constructed on the remaining peninsula. In the center was a holy temple dedicated to Cleito and Poseidon. It remained inaccessible and was surrounded by an enclosure of gold. This was the spot where the family of the 10 princes first saw the light, and where the people annually brought fruits of the earth in their season from all the 10 countries to be an offering to each of the 10 princes. In the center of the larger of the 2 islands, there was a race course for horses to race in. It was allowed to extend all around the island. That's enough about the royal palace. Leaving the palace and passing across the zones, we come to the city. The entire area was densely populated, and the canal and the largest harbors were full of vessels and merchants coming from all over the world. And because of their numbers, you could hear human voices with din and clatter of all sorts, night and day. I have described the city and the surrounding environments of the ancient palace nearly in the words of Solon. And now I must describe the nature and arrangements of the rest of the land. Solon said that the whole country was very lofty and precipitous on the side of the sea, but the country immediately about and surrounding the city was a level plain, itself surrounded by a mountain range which descended toward the sea. The plain was smooth and even, and of an oblong shape. It extended in one direction 330 miles, but across the center inland, it was 110 miles. This part of the continent looked toward the south and was sheltered from the north. The plain was fashioned by nature and by the labors of many generations of kings through long ages. There was a large ditch that followed its coastline. The depth and width and length of this ditch were incredible and gave the impression that a work of such extent, in addition to so many others, could never have been artificial. The ditch was excavated to a depth of 100 feet, and its width was 600 feet everywhere. It went around the whole plain and was 1,100 miles long. It received the streams that came down the mountains and went around the plain, meeting at the city, where its waters ran off into the sea. Further inland, straight canals 100 feet wide were cut from the ditch through the plain, letting the water off into the sea. These canals were at intervals of 11 miles. They transported the fruits of the earth in ships by traversing passages from one canal into another and to the city.
The following is another quote from Plato. This statement was injected into the story to explain what happened to Atlantis.
But afterwards there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune, the soldiers sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared in the depths of the sea.
Sailors went back out into the ocean looking for Atlantis after the floods and devastation. When they came upon what should have been Atlantis, they found a shoal of mud and thought it was the debris from the sunken continent. From their description, they assumed the continent had sunk. We now know that a large tsunami will turn a flat, level plain into a mud flat. From the ocean, they would not have been able to tell that the mountains and the rest of the continent were still standing.
Now you know the true meanings of Atlantis. The Atlantis Kingdom was once the boundless continent known as North, South, and Central America. Atlantis continent refers to either North America or South America as one of the Atlantis continents. Atlantis country describes the area of land including Florida, Georgia, the Appalachian Mountains, and the Great Lakes. It was the royal country that ruled over the other 9 countries. Atlantis City refers to the Royal City of Atlantis and is now Tampa, Florida. Atlantis Island refers to the small triangular island now known as Harbor Island near Tampa, and it was once the home of the royal palace.
Plato wrote of Atlantis in past tense because he thought it had sunk. The truth is, Atlantis is still very much above water today with all of its geographic features in place, tangible and measurable, just as Plato described.